The first thing Pinocchio does with his new hands is kill someone. That is not the Disney version. That is chapter 4. You were told Pinocchio is a story about lying, a sweet wooden boy, a kindly Geppetto, a wise cricket, a fairy, a lesson, a reward. That is the fake version. The real Pinocchio is a story about poverty, punishment, and what it takes to turn a wild child into something useful. Carlo Collodi, the Florentine journalist and satirist who wrote it in the early 1880s, did not write like a man composing a bedtime story. He wrote like a man who had spent too long watching institutions fail the people beneath them. And once you read what he actually put on the page, Disney stops looking like an adaptation and starts looking like a cleanup crew. It begins with a block of firewood in the workshop of a carpenter called Master Cherry. He raises his axe, and the wood cries out. A tiny voice from inside the log begs him not to strike so hard. He panics. Then Geppetto arrives asking for a piece of wood. Not because he wants a son, because he wants a puppet he can train to dance and tumble so it can earn him money. That matters. Disney gives you a warm old toy maker with a shop full of clocks. Collodi gives you a poor man looking for a way to survive. Geppetto takes the wood home and starts carving. The eyes move. The mouth laughs at him. The hands snatch off his wig. The feet kick him in the face. Before the thing is even finished, it is already mocking the man who made it. Then Geppetto sets it down to teach it to walk. Pinocchio runs, straight out the door, down the street. Geppetto chases after him. A policeman sees an old man pursuing a fleeing child and decides the old man must be the danger, so Geppetto goes to jail. That also matters, because Collodi's world is crooked from the first page. The poor are blamed first, the weak pay first. Somebody else causes the chaos, and the man with nothing is the one dragged away. Pinocchio goes back to the empty house and meets the talking cricket. The cricket tells him what adults always tell children. Obey your parents, study, work, behave, or you will end badly. Pinocchio tells him to shut up. The cricket keeps talking. Pinocchio picks up a hammer and throws it. And that is where the famous morality tale really begins, with a child smashing his conscience flat against the wall because he is hungry, furious, and already sick of being preached at by creatures who do not have to live his life. Then the story gets cruel fast. Pinocchio is starving. He begs for food and gets a basin of water dumped over his head. He falls asleep with his feet on a brazier and wakes up to find they have burned off. Geppetto comes home from prison and gives him the only food he has. Then he carves him new feet. Then he sells his only coat so Pinocchio can have a spelling book and go to school. See the image clearly. An old man in winter without a coat, so a child can have a school book. The state can announce that every child must be educated. It sounds noble. It sounds civilized. But Collodi goes straight for the question that polite people always leave out. Who pays for the coat? Who pays for the shoes? Who pays for the book? Geppetto does. Pinocchio takes the spelling book, hears music from a puppet theatre, and sells it almost immediately for a ticket. And this is where people flatten the story into something small and stupid. A naughty boy making bad choices, a moral lesson about impulse control. No. This is a child with no discipline, no stability, no real guidance, and a brain built entirely out of appetite colliding with a system that demands virtue from the poor while giving them hunger, spectacle, and traps. At the theatre, the puppet master Mangiafuoco nearly burns Pinocchio as firewood. Then Pinocchio meets the fox and the cat, two con artists who promise him that if he buries his coins in the field of wonders, they will grow into a fortune overnight. He believes them. Of course he does. Why would he not? The honest world has already told him to suffer now, and maybe be rewarded later. The crooks tell him he can skip the suffering and get rich tomorrow. That lie never dies. It just keeps changing outfits. They rob him. They chase him through the woods. They hang him from an oak tree. And for a while, that was the ending. That is one of the strangest facts about Pinocchio. Collodi originally stopped the story there. The puppet hanging in the wind. Story over. Readers forced it back to life. So the fairy appears, and she is not Disney's polished little blue fairy drifting down in a cloud of approval. In her first appearance, she is a dead child at a window. White face, closed eyes, hands folded like a body laid out for burial. She tells Pinocchio that everyone in the house is dead, including her. Then she shuts the window. The first person who offers Pinocchio help is already dead. That tells you everything about who Collodi thinks is coming to save these children. Disney turns her into a glowing wish granter. Collodi gives you a ghost with turquoise hair. And she does not simply bless Pinocchio, she watches him, tests him, judges him, forgives him, punishes him. She becomes something between a sister, a mother, and a haunting. Even Mercy in this book arrives wearing funeral colours. The famous nose scene happens here, and even that has been distorted by adaptation. In the original story, the nose is not the whole point. It is just one sharp detail in a much uglier machine. Disney took the most memorable visual in the book and made it the brand. Because Disney is interested in lying. Collodi is interested in discipline. Then comes the land of toys. No school, no books, no teachers, no rules. Every day is play. And Collodi is smart enough to make it beautiful first. That is why it works. Pinocchio goes. His friend Lampwick goes. The boys laugh, riot, play, and live as if the world belongs to them. For 5 months. Then the donkey ears appear. That scene is still one of the most horrifying things ever written for children. They feel it happening to their own bodies. The ears, the tail, the face stretching, the voice collapsing into a bray. They try to speak and can only make animal sounds. And then they are sold. That is the joke. That is the blade hidden in the candy. A world that refuses to educate children does not leave them free. It turns them into labour, into muscle, into property, into bodies that can be whipped, worked, bought, and skinned. Pinocchio is sold to a circus. When he goes lame, he's sold again to a man who wants his skin for a drumhead. Not even a whole drum. Just the part that gets beaten. Collodi is not being subtle. He's not interested in subtlety. He's telling you exactly what happens to children when adults decide their only value is what can be extracted from them. Eventually Pinocchio ends up in the sea, the donkey flesh stripped away, wooden again. Then he is swallowed by the great sea monster, not Disney's whale but a monstrous dogfish. And inside, in the dark, he finds Geppetto, still alive, still waiting, still paying for everything. That is where the story turns, not because magic fixes him, because for the first time Pinocchio stops running. He takes his father on his back, he carries him out, he works, he earns money, he gives it away. He learns sacrifice the hard way, which is the only way anyone learns anything in Collodi's world. And then, finally, Pinocchio becomes a real boy. This is where Disney wants applause. But Collodi leaves something in the room that Disney cannot afford to look at for too long. On the chair beside him lies the old puppet body, wooden, limp, empty. He does not make it disappear. He leaves it there. Because that is the real question at the centre of the book. What does it mean to become real? In Disney it means your wish came true. In Collodi it means something colder. The creature who ran through the streets, laughed in danger, lied, kicked, bit, escaped, and refused to move in a straight line through the world, that creature has to die. In its place is a proper boy, human, disciplined, useful, acceptable. That is the ending. Not just a puppet becoming real, a child becoming manageable, and once you see that, the whole story changes shape. This is not just a fable about honesty. It is a story about a society that punishes disorder and calls obedience virtue. A story about adults who exploit children while preaching morality at them. A story about poverty so severe that goodness itself becomes expensive. That is what Disney cut out. The hunger, the humiliation, the labour, the way every promise of salvation comes attached to a threat. The real Pinocchio is not darker just because it has dead crickets and donkey children and a ghostly fairy at a window. It is darker because it understands something true. Children are always told that becoming good will save them. Collodi asks a much crueler question. Good for whom? And he leaves you with the answer sitting right there in the final image. A boy in bed, a puppet in a chair. One of them is now real. The other one is still visible. Collodi leaves the puppet there, slumped in the chair, staring at the boy it became. He wants you to decide which one was really alive,